of the law firm of Clement Muller. I represent the applicant. At this time, I'd like to call my first witness in connection with this application for preliminary and final subdivision approval. And it is a major subdivision, although originally filed as a minor subdivision. Mr. Downs is my first witness.
Mr. Downs, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? And please state your name and address for the record and spell your last name.
Sure. My name is James Downs, D-O-W-N-S. I reside at 44 Prentice Lane, Mendham, New Jersey.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Can you share a little bit of your personal education and professional background and your current areas of interest?
Sure. Been a New Jersey resident for 15 years. Lived in Mendham Borough for approximately 25 years. Raised a family of 5 children. Professionally speaking, graduated Lehigh University in 1980 as an engineer. My particular areas of expertise are energy engineering, architectural engineering, and sustainability. My career has included the design, build, and development of what I would say are premium quality residential architectural projects of a boutique nature for the last 37 years, with a particular eye and bent toward energy efficiency and sustainability. I retain a license and a certification as a channel partner with the Office of Clean Energy of the state of New Jersey, whereby we are able to disseminate incentive monies and work on other people's sustainable projects. I've done that professionally to enhance what my own personal goals have been since 1980, and that is to be in premier architectural development and construction and design, and again with the idea toward sustainable construction and development. This project, 1120, that I'm coming to you for, I've been aware of its availability as essentially a depleted property, one that was not well maintained for probably 10 years. Not to offend anybody that might have worked on it, built it, designed it, that might be in the room. But essentially it was all the bad things you could do to a piece of property was done. It's been for sale for about 10 years. I've looked at it probably a half a dozen times in those 10 years, and people were essentially begging me to do something with it. Good thing about in my craft, in my field, is that negatives are often the positive that you turn a project around on. And so I see the ability to take what's done wrong, spin it around, and use my talents to turn around and design this as 2 great, Bedminster rural agrarian type home sites, where we take the existing environmental problems on the site that I think our engineer, Some Design, will talk about a little bit, and have some photos to show you why this site is a really good site and why nobody bought it for 10 years. We actually see that as a positive. So we can take a pond that's been silted up, and we can take a stream corridor that's been eroded, and we can enhance the environment and ultimately make it into 2 beautiful sites, but also sustainable, not only from the vertical architecture, but from the horizontal lot development in having sustainable agriculture. So and oh, by the way, I've been doing this for 37 years. The rest of the world is finally starting to catch up, and they're starting to understand that if we don't have clean air, clean water, and clean food, we have nothing, and we're not healthy if our environment isn't healthy. That would just seem to be obvious. It's kind of like the golden rule. But the buyers now are starting to understand that too, and family offices across the country are starting to understand if they invest in real estate and those projects are not sustainable, ultimately they'll return nothing to them. And in the case of farmland in Bedminster, we've depleted, topsoil layer. These farms are not really producing anything but hay, just a way to, sort of dodge taxes in some respects. So we believe there's a new a new paradigm, and that's to turn these farms into actually sustainable farm properties and homes. And that's by using technology, things that allow us to use LEEDs design, technology that allows us both from the supply and demand side to have almost net zero energy usage, lowered carbon footprint. And that's the technology side, but for a amount of that is also getting simpler too. So technology allows us to change some things, better some things, but it also dial back to just, good farming principles and sustainable agriculture allows us to turn this property over and not have it become fallow again and not be eroded again. So that's my goal, and I think we're enhancing both the environment to the betterment of everybody involved, the ultimate residents, and to the community. So.
Can you describe the existing improvements briefly and what you would propose to do with those existing improvements in connection with this application?
The existing property is approximately 22 to 23 acres. It is roughly divided by the Hoopstick Brook. There's a man-made farmer's pond that was built many decades ago. Now silted up and it's covered with algae. We'll show some pictures. I think Ron might show you some of that. The stream corridor is completely eroded. Trees have grown on the stream corridor, such as to create erosion for the entire width of the property. There's really stabilized embankment on any of the stream that's there now. There's an existing home which has a lot of impervious coverage. There's a lot of pavement. There's a lot of curbing. There's light posts from San Francisco streets. There's dilapidated barns, dilapidated running sheds. There's abandoned tractors. There's, this is a property that was not maintained. And the book serves sort of bifurcate, if you will, the property to anybody really getting to the back of the property and maintaining it on a regular basis. The brook had probably posed a problem to former residents, former owners. So they were really good custodians of the property, maybe decades ago, but for decades it's just sat there and is eroded. The structure really doesn't have any value. The property they dropped the base on the property, and you started having bottom feeders looking to basically, rent a structure that should be torn down. Our goal is to tear down the home, remove all the impervious coverage, all the pavement, all the curbing, all the fencing. At least at this point, probably put a fencing back that's appropriate fencing. All the San Francisco street lights come down, all the barns come down, all the running sheds come down, all the the buried vehicles and tractors come out, and we start enhancing and limiting the runoff and the erosion. Enhance the pond probably with littoral shelves in addition to other processes that will take good care of this watershed.
Current house is set back approximately how far from the road?
I'd have to check with the plan if I can do that, but within 150, within 200 feet of the property line, I believe that along Lamington Road, required setback is 200 feet. If you're familiar with the property, you'll realize that whether that it's the zoning or not, it's way too close to the road because of the topography and the grading. So just the way it sits naturally, it doesn't lend to a positive streetscape, in my opinion. I think the appropriate house needs to be twice that far back from the road. So one of the things we're recommending is that we double the zoning front yard setback from 200 feet to 400 feet for a start. Because of the grade change from the street, as it starts to get to that 400 feet back, grade change elevation-wise, it slopes back as you move further from the curb. And I believe there's a grade change at our recommended footprint of a home to be built that's roughly 20 feet, I think, below elevation of the current curb of the street.
Based on your experience in this specific market, do you, and we're going to get details from Claire as far as what we're specifically proposing in terms of concept feel that these lots will be big enough to situate appropriate homes that would be of interest to the market as it currently sits.
Absolutely. I think that's really why we're here. I think I stated that I do believe there's a different paradigm here. There's definitely a shift in people's consciousness about what they believe the correct home for them is now. And I've seen this over 37 years, and honestly, I grew up in the family, so I'm a third-generation design builder, so I've seen it from a much younger age. It used to be that more was more, not less is more. It used to be all about details and what else could you do. Now people are starting to understand that the architecture we're involved in creating these days and project is where there's a synergy between a sense of place, which is really what good design starts, is understanding where you are. It's not one size fits all. It's not this house has to go there. It's what does the land tell us, what does the community tell us, and what's appropriate for this. So, like I mentioned earlier, when everybody else was seeing what was wrong with this property, it wasn't so beautiful, it was ugly, it was this, and I said, this is a fantastic piece of property. It's just been treated improperly. And if we treat it properly, I think we can have two beautiful home sites, one set high and up in the back to the property, and set at least 400 feet from the street that arguably you really wouldn't see, and what you did see would be appropriate for the streetscape of Remington Road as we know today. At least the good old farm homes that are sustainable and were done right and have been maintained properly. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I think the public out there is crying for this, not just in Bedminster, but in Mendham where I work, in Bernardsville, and a lot of other areas around the country.
That's all I have on Mr. Downs' affirmative presentation. We can either ask him questions now, or we can reserve until after you have the full.
Does the board have any questions for?
Not the moment.
No? Okay. The public? Yes, Paul, yes, go
I
ahead.
did have a couple because.
Yes, go ahead.
You said a lot of good things about, what you would potentially do to the property in abstract terms.
Sure.
You said potentially littoral shelves to improve the pond. Are you going to do that?
Yes.
So that would be a condition of the approval. So you'd have to have those permits before the subdivision is filed.
Absolutely.
About the stream channel, are you doing anything in that?
Yes. And I would love for Rob to get the opportunity to delineate what we think we need to do along with his engineering and his evaluation. And then if Ron hasn't answered something, I'm happy to weigh in. We think we've got most of the key elements, Paul, of what we need to do with the watershed around the pond. And obviously we know, working with your office to make sure that we're dotting i's and crossing t's and taking the best from your experience in your office.
Well, the reason why I'm asking these questions is because, you've said these things, and if part of it is backup for the rationale for the variance,
Absolutely.
I think the board needs to keep that in mind and realize that it's got to continue on with any approval if it were to be granted. Another item, you said all the existing impervious was going to be removed.
Correct.
There's a concrete bridge over the stream, and it's not to be removed, so you're going to be taking that out as well?
Will be relocated.
We show doing a crossing that we think is a better crossing, and we'd like to eliminate that crossing in favor of a new crossing done properly.
It's going to be removing that other bridge.
That we would like to do that, yeah.
Okay. On the house development side, you talked about LEED, you talked about net zero. Is it going to be incorporated into these homes?
Yes.
To what extent?
The design drawings and the design development that will occur after approval of the subdivision is going to detail that. So our intent is to get as close to net zero as practically possible. And the solutions are everywhere. We invoke these on a daily basis in different ways, but our goal here is to do a LEED certified construction. Of what level, we're not really sure, but we also haven't designed the homes yet. So we'd like to aim, we think the better we do, the better the project is. In other words, the closer we get to net zero, the better the project is. I can't guarantee that it will in fact be net zero, but that is certainly the goal. Both controlling on the demand side the usage of energy and invoking renewables and controls thereof and power storage. So those ideas are things that we're working on with other projects that we want to invoke here.
Okay.
Having not designed the homes yet, it's still the driving force behind what we're doing.
Okay, and part of my interest is in the LEED certification and exactly what you're going to do relative to that, because as time has gone by, LEED has become a heavier and heavier lift.
It is. LEED certification is, I don't want to mince words, but as a Office of Clean Energy custodian for the state, I deal with other people and their desires to get to net zero, their desires to be LEED's platinum, or whatever the goals are, and sometimes the heavy lift financially doesn't warrant getting close as you'd like to be. So I don't think there's anything compelling us to do this. But it happens to be my business and what I do.
And I
Other
understand.
children may come in and say, I don't really care about this stuff. I just want to.
And I understand that, and that's exactly my concern. If you do not end up building these lots, and somebody else does build these lots, then whatever representations you're making tonight has to live on it, so that next builder has to comply with the same requirements. It's at all part of the justification for the variances.
I didn't see myself as justifying a variance because I wasn't even talking about the variance. I'm just talking about what I do for a living on a daily basis and how I execute my work on a daily basis for the last 37 years. So I'm not saying it's not justification, but I actually didn't think about it in that manner. I was just saying what I think is appropriate to do to the property and how to do it. And I think the fallout of that is this is where our focus is right now, is healthy environments inside and out. And being that I've made a living on this side, building energy efficient, quality residences, it's still my goal, it's still my focus. I think this is a great opportunity to enhance the environment inside and out and to build those sustainable structures and properties that we can on these two lots. If there is a need for some justification beyond that, I believe most of it would be what we're doing, not necessarily within the building itself, but probably the exterior. And I think anything that would, I guess if we're talking about the approval itself, any of the contingencies or conditions of approval that relate to what we're doing environmentally on the property, I think they should always be adhered to.
And that's the point. This approval is not about you.
Right.
The approval is about the land.
About the land. And the only thing I could say that I don't know, I've actually never been involved with a project where the vertical construction, despite that being our focus, and it's just what we do on a daily basis, I don't see that as being as important environmentally, because I think today's solutions are naturally energy efficient. The building codes have stepped up to require, whether it's insulation values, Energy Star ratings, I have no problem tying the approvals into something like that. But I think the largest thing here is that we get the environmental aspects correct.
Right.
I think this will be covered with Ron when he goes to, yes, go ahead, Bill.
I'd just like to clarify, because a lot was said in your opening statement.
Sure.
Do you currently own the property?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, so your intent is to build 2 single-family homes
Correct.
on each subdivision, each
Right.
property?
It's roughly 22 acres, so roughly in 10-acre zone, roughly 10 acres per, 11 acres per. We understand that there's some environmental conditions that request us to sit here and talk about variances and design waiver. There's 2 things. So we actually think that the ability to enhance those environmental issues, the thing that hurts us is the thing that helps us.
Right. Well, the question I have for you is, when you envision these properties completed and finished, are these estate properties, or are they more like farm homes, farm properties? How do you break that out? Because I'd like to know what we're actually looking at. Are we looking at an enhancement to the structures so that people can live there and farm, or are we looking at an estate property that's 10 acres?
It's a good question, and I think we're using terms that they're not mutually exclusive, right?
I understand.
So I think if we use the term gentleman farm, and I think what that's meant in Bedminster and other communities like Mendham Township and our surrounding areas, Burnersville, is where you have, a larger piece of property that you get farm investment on. Basically, you have some farm coming in and cutting hay once a year, maybe twice, submit your farm assessment, maybe there's some woodland, and, oh, by the way, property has that now. We think that's underutilizing the property from a farm perspective. So we've done to think about property a little differently. We believe that it's not just a home that can be farm assessed that you landscape. We're looking at the property from side to side, back to front, as being where it is and what do those natural resources tell us we need to do to protect it, sustain it. And we believe that agriculture is part of that. And we'd like to think that there's meadows and there may in fact be some hay. But we think that organic kitchen gardens and things like that are part of our design today. Proper use of water and water collection and using that for irrigation, and so I think there's a lot of things going on here. So to your point, I like to think of the home site more of a farm with a house on it than an estate, but I do think it's an estate. It's 10 plus acres per, and I think it is a high-end luxury product at this point, because I think you have to put the heavy lift of trying to get to net zero, to trying to have it sustainable. Unfortunately, it's not that cheap to do. So it's going to be done well and done right, and people today go care about that. They understand that, what they're eating, what they're putting in their mouths, what they're drinking, and what they're doing to their environment may just be causing problems with their health.
Okay.
Great.
Frank, I think you wanted to,
A feeling for how big the floor area of these homes would be?
I don't see the homes being as big as they were on these estates through the years. I think the very large, ridiculous-sized home.
Let's talk number.
Probably, 6,000 square feet is probably the right.
What's the,
Call it a maximum, but I would say somewhere no less.
No, that helps us a lot, understand the scale.
concept here? What's the size of the concept?
We have footprints, but we don't necessarily have full floor plans on multiple levels. So we have a footprint, and Ron can speak to the square footage of the footprint. Again, whether that becomes a developed full two-story building or whether it becomes some story and a half or one-story basis. So again, I want to, before I start dining that, I need to kind of get some basics down, and we don't do one fits all. We want to design that for a family in mind and say, what are the needs and what is the program and what's important to this family versus another.
I'd like to go back to Mr. Ferrera's questions. You spent a lot of time talking about sustainability.
Sure.
And LEED certification and things like that. Frank, can we attach conditions like it must be LEED Gold as of 2016 or something like that to our conditions?
Whether or not that's an appropriate condition at the level of a
Whether it's
specific
appropriate or not,
LEED certification,
type position?
because it could be a real poison pill in the event that this is not the builder. Somebody else to have to find out what commissioning and all that other stuff is all about through the LEED program. I think what Paul was getting at, and it's the basic question you have, the way your ordinance is written, because of the nature of the environmental limitations on this property, it qualifies for 1 2/3 houses. And I think the arguments that you're hearing, and I don't mean to dispute them by way of this comment, are that these two houses would have, you don't get 1 2/3 houses. You either have a house or you have two houses, two lots. The argument would be that you're going to have enough of a beneficial environmental impact that it'll be like having one house, or not like having two houses, or something along those lines. And I suspect that we don't want to prejudge what Ron's going to say. We want to hear him talk about this. But that's really your job tonight, is to figure out if you're supposed to put a second house on this lot. both in terms of those environmental characteristics across the lot and in terms of the specific location on the lot where the second house would go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I want to go back to Lou's line of questioning, and you made a lot of comments about the agricultural part of it, but, and again, this is a subdivision question, this is not a site plan, so I do want to be careful not to hold you too much to what you've got on the paper here, but you're going to have a bunch of outbuildings, and in Bedminster, agriculture around here tends to be more horse farms and hay anyway. Not necessarily because of folks being neglectful with the soil, but soil doesn't perk around here.
Right.
You can't put corn in the ground anyway. You can, but it ain't going to grow very much. So I guess back to Lou's question, are these estates or are they farms? Or I understand gentleman farms. I don't necessarily think you could give me a wrong answer, but I'm just really more interested in what you think the intent is. Because if we're going to figure out if it's 1 2/3 house or 2 houses, I'm personally not opposed to large-scale houses. If you can't put a mansion up in the R10 in Bedminster, New Jersey, there's no place in the world you should be able to put a mansion up. I get it. But I just really want to know, what is your intent? What is the character we're going to see so we know, so we can figure out if it's Bedminster?
The character for me is, certainly there's nothing wrong with mansions. I think if you looked at my website, you'd see that we've built a few. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. Like I said, I think it's the sign of the times. And hopefully you're designing and building what's appropriate for the site and what's appropriate for the occupants. And I think what I view for this is an agrarian-style country farmhouse times 2, properly situated on the property, and properly communicating with the water course that's on the property, the pond that's on the property, the natural elevations of the property, and putting home sites where home sites belong, and putting farm elements where they belong, and taking care of the watershed the way it should be, and having that integrate with whether it's farm, landscape, and home itself. And the style of that home would be have traditional elements with modern technology and sustainable. I'll use the word sustainable because it's really true. And so will there be wood shake roofs? Probably. Will there be standing seam copper roofs in areas? Possibly. Will there be natural stone indigenous that's dug out of the fields when the foundations are dug? More than likely.
No, don't get me wrong. I'm not interested in micromanaging your landscape and design.
Right.
But it's agrarian if it's going to be agriculture. You see in Bedminster, mostly agriculturally is horse farms.
Right.
And when I look at your plan here, is there a place where you would be able to put a pasture? Is there a place where you could put a corral or a barn where horses could be? Where would they fit in, given the zoning, the setbacks, and the water courses and whatever? In other words, if somebody on the property that's more to the south, say they want to put some outbuildings, so they want to have 2 or 3 horses, and they might want to put a ring or a little. Is there a potential for that, or not? Is it more, growing produce? I'm not saying that the answer you give me is right or wrong. I'm just looking for what is your vision.
My vision
in that
is that
regard.
there's a balance of that. I think we'll be growing something on these properties. And we're going to spend some time detailing what could be grown. Do I think there's also potential for horses? There's horses there now. I have horses on the property. I rode there the other day. But what's happened is that the horses that have been there for a long time, there are really too many horses, not per zoning, but they basically have trampled the property, and there's a good reason for some of the erosion of some of the horses. Do I think the appropriately designed home site could include horses with an outdoor ring? Absolutely. With stables again? Absolutely. Properly done? No problem with that. I doubt that that's the case for the back part of the property. On the upper elevation to the south of the Hoopstick Brook, I doubt that would be a great horse site. But there is a sense of, in Bedminster, where your horse is kept isn't necessarily where you're living, right? So I don't, there certainly could be horses still on the front part of that property, as there is today, but I don't see it as being exactly the way it is today. I think better done.
Anyone from the board? Anyone? Okay. Okay, anything from the public? Seeing none? Next witness?
I'd like to call Ron Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say his name?
Thank you.
You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And please, your name and address.
Certainly. Ron Kennedy, 265 Main Street, Gladstone, New Jersey.
And just confirm for the record that the board recognizes and accepts Mr. Kennedy's qualifications as a professional engineer
Planner.
and professional planner. Please go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you. Tom, I'm just going to introduce the exhibits too, before I can start.
Sure. Start with A1. You can. No. Trina has, no, you're satisfied. You gave them to Trina though, right? Okay, yeah.
Good evening. Jim did a lot of details that I would typically go through, so I'm going to rehash a couple of minor ones on that. But just for introduction of the property, Exhibit A1 is an overall area of not only the property but the neighborhood. In the center of the property is the lot that's outlined in yellow. Lamington Road bisects the exhibit on the left side, and generally north is to the left, south to the right, east, and then west to the low side of the sheet. You can see the property itself is a rectangular piece of property. It's approximately 511 foot wide and about 2,000 foot deep. The development patterns in the neighborhood are a subdivision that we did for the Eld property 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It was a while ago. You still had the R3%. That was down in here, that two new house sites were built off of that. Across the street is a large tract of land that's approximately 1,000 acres across the land. And then you have what is the JCP&L substation that's just adjoining this property in the northeast corner of the property. And there's an undeveloped tract of land that is just to the east of the property. Here is the Three Bears property that has primary access out to a larger crossroad south. That has a series of houses on it and a fairly large farm that's on it. So the property specifically in this exhibit, on the aerial exhibit, shows the house up in the front. As Mr. Downs said, it's approximately 190 feet off of the road that's there. The typical landscape that would be around the house. When I show a more blown-up plan, you'll see some of the impervious coverage that's around there. The pond is in the center and a predominant feature in this exhibit in the center of the property. Tree area that in the center of the property is the Hoopstick Brook, and my next exhibit will show a lot more details of that. And there's a farm field in the back, approximately 7 acres of a farm field that's in the rear of the property. As I zoom in, I'm going to go through the existing conditions, environmental constraints on the next exhibit.
That'll be A1 in evidence, and the next one is A2. Just identify what it is first.
I will. It's an environmental constraints exhibit with today's date. And if we zoom in on this exhibit, you can see the entire property. It's in the same orientation, Lamington Road on the left to the north. This exhibit shows the house environment around the house. There's a driveway, a single driveway that's out to Lamington Road, large courtyard in the front, large courtyard in the back, and a driveway that goes to the rear of the property back towards the pond. There's other primary buildings, a barn building that's in the back, a series of sheds, run-in sheds. All these structures are all within the side yard, some of them as close to 5 or 6 feet off of the property line, that have been built over the years. Property looks like the pond was built between 68 and 74 by the aerial photos. The house itself was built in the 70s, just for some time elements associated with this. Bisecting the property generally from the northeast to the southwest is the Hoopstick Brook, and you see I have a big color line on there. And then along the Hoopstick Brook are all the typical environmental issues or environmental features that are along there, which are wetlands, riparian corridors, floodplains, and that shows all the different colors that you see along here, each representing different levels of constraints or environmental constraints that are on there. In addition to that, there's steep slopes that are shown out there with bright either red or yellow colors that are along those stream corridors. There's also some steep slopes that are around the house itself, the existing house, and that's just primarily built when they built the house between grade levels from the front to the back, but you still count those as steep slopes that would be in the front of the property. Pond was built, again, some time ago, and that has now created its own set of wetland around the pond, and then it has transition areas or buffers around the outside of that. Someone brought up, and I'm not sure if it was Jim or Paul, about the existing crossing. I'm going to show some photos of that. An old crossing, it's 2 or 3 older corrugated metal pipes that were thrown on the ground, and it looks like a dump truck backed up to it with a concrete mixer and just dumped about 20 yards of concrete on top of it. And that was the crossing that was built back then. Whether it was the farmer or this homeowner, we can't tell, but it's been there for quite some time, and I'll show you some photos that are associated with that, that's on the property. That's the primary, features that are on here. If I show you some photos, of the existing conditions.
A3.
Existing conditions photo, October 12th, 2017. And this is pretty far for you to see. Maybe I'll pass it around if the board members would like to do that. But it shows some existing photos. The top left panel is that concrete, can't call it a bridge, but structure that's through there. And you can see the stream pass through. This beautiful green-looking pond is the pond. It's full of algae. It's not been maintained for a long time. And I'm going to talk about specific improvements that we would make as any conditions to the pond and what we would do. You'll see another feature here, which is the stream corridor itself, and you can see it's badly eroded along that stream corridor. It has some steep, I'll say, embankment erosion that's along there. And along that same hoop stick sections, in other sections of Bedminster Township, we've done some pretty good things along those areas that we were able to get permits from DEP that we're willing to commit to enhance those corridors right in the stream channels itself. You'll also see this other picture, believe it or not, is the stream corridor, and there's no water flowing through it. So these were photos that were taken the last couple of weeks. We know it's low flow this time of year. We haven't had much rain, but that area does dry out. So it's a ponded area here that has maybe 6 inches, a foot of water in it, and then other areas in that same corridor, it gets dry. And then you see the photo up here that has, some ponding that's there because it's inconsistent. It just has settlement of solids over the years that have accumulated there, and it creates ponds in some areas and it creates dry areas in others. You can also see on this right panel, the middle right panel, the erosion along there, and we think there's some techniques that we can do to fix that and get the proper permits from DEP to do that work. Next exhibit, our label is A4, and this is the subdivision exhibit. Tom, that's today's date.
A4.
Yeah, and then subdivision rendering. This exhibit, same panel, same view. What we looked at a number of different things. Based on your ordinance, based on what we've done in other subdivisions in Bedminster Township, we looked at where realistically house site could go. In this case, the 2 house sites, an environment around those house sites that we established first. We did soil testing out there. We obviously got, to this point, we got approved soil testing. We went to the Board of Health and have approval already for primary and reserve systems for each of those houses. And you can see the locations in these 2 locations. The next thing we look at is where driveways go. And it's a whole discussion all the time. Do you do a common driveway with something like this? Do you do individual driveways? You have a 511-foot of frontage. You can't change that. To the left side of it is the JCP&L substation. That would be an enormous process to try to take that, knock it down, and expand the lot. On the west side, that is a driveway on a 50-foot flag stem to a rear lot that has a driveway, so there's no reason or ability to expand it to the west. So we have the 511-foot frontage. We know the historic pattern along the property itself, that it is a house. Generally, I'll call it a new house. It's not a farmhouse that represents Old Bedminster that sits 10 foot off the roadway that defines what Larger Cross, actually it's called Lesser Cross Road, which is the intersection of Larger Cross and Landuse Road, where those houses are really close to the roadway. That defines a little neighborhood. But I get on either side of that, traveling from either 206 to this location or from Larger Cross out to the Tewksbury border, the houses are all set back traditionally very far, and the farm fields in front of that. This wasn't, and this was in a newer house that was built, and it's put kind of close to the road. It complied with zoning at the time. It's definitely always been viewed as something that was relatively close to the road. And landscaping is non-native landscaping that's there. Boxy building that's there. It doesn't look like a traditional farmhouse that's in there. So we said, well, obviously even at the 200-foot setback, we don't want that there. And if we had a chance to do it over again, and that's what we're talking about doing, let's push that house site much farther back on the lot. Let's get the benefit of viewing the pond area that we can make a much more better enhancement. And we can take this area that's in the front, and this house site is shown at 500 foot back from the road. So if I even take some 450 foot back, take a box here, 450 by 500, and that could be a farm field in the front. We're showing on the plan a series of street trees. That doesn't have to be shown for a subdivision, but we're showing a series of street trees that we have. I believe there's about 7 or 8 street trees along there as an enhancement to the streetscape along there. These would be, relatively sizable, will become nice street trees, try to bring that back and get some farm field that's in the front of here that would represent more of how Lamington Road looks in these areas of the township. And I think Jim said the applicant would be willing to agree to an enhanced setback. We talked about 400 foot that would be enhanced setback, that no structure, not only the principal structure, but no structure could be closer than 400 foot to the road. With the driveway, we looked at the options of a single driveway that would be shared or two individual driveways. So we chose, obviously, and we show a driveway that would be on the east side of this tract. There is some site distance issues that would be on the existing driveway right now, and while it's pre-existing, the county wouldn't force to move that. We don't think it's a good idea to keep that existing driveway. So we would move that to the east and have a single driveway point that would provide the site distance out to the road, and it would be a common driveway. And it would go to the house that's in what's called Lot 15 and to what we're proposing in Act 15.01. You see the line going down along the eastern property line, the driveway, that's parallel to the road. And we're also talking about adding screening that would be conditioned to any approval all along that road. Not only would it benefit this resident that would be on 1501 and 15, also the screening that we would plant, which would be an evergreen screening that's closer to the substation, would also benefit the traveling public as they go by. Right now, you're looking right into that substation. And it's getting bigger, it's never getting smaller. And with the electric needs these days, it just seems like it's getting bigger as they add more things. So we would screen that area along there and make that condition to any approval. The road itself goes down and is parallel, or the driveway, sorry, is parallel to the property line. And then you see this arc that goes around that. And what we looked at is all along the stream corridor, where was the best place to cross? And we thought that the existing driveway, where that crossing, or the crossing, whatever that is, it wasn't the best place to cross. And we thought from an environmental benefit, this was the best place to cross there. One that's permittable with DEP, one that has the least disruption into that environment. And that's where we would, we're showing that crossing. We'd have to obviously get permits from DEP. And then it would go back to the rear lot 1501 that's being proposed, back to the proposed house site. And the driveway would be common up to a certain point and come into this other house site. So after we look at house site settings, after we look at driveways, the last thing we look at is where are lot lines. And the last thing is to draw lot lines to be consistent as we can to your ordinance. Your ordinance requires a 50-foot frontage requirement for any lot, which we comply with on both lots. And in this case, we have the flag stem is actually on the west side of the property. And what we did is have the flag stem on the west side, even though the common driveway is on the east side. And the primary reason for that is it's simple math in the sense, if we put the flag stem on the other side, that counts as impervious coverage. And no matter what side, even if the lot was 15 acres, we wouldn't be able to easily comply with your lot coverage criteria, only being 5% for the zone. So that's the primary reason for that. The benefit is, in the variance we're seeking for in the lot circle that needs to be around each lot, is it's a 500-foot lot circle. Because we're 511 foot wide and we take 50 foot away, it means that this lot, in the front lot, is only 461 feet wide. So that's the largest circle I can get into that space. That needs relief from your ordinance. It's a 500-foot circle. In this case, and the particular instance of this case, the area that is the flag stem will not have a driveway. It'll be conditioned that it won't have a driveway on it. It acts and behaves as an open space. It won't have it'll have no ability to build structure inside of it. It's only 50 foot wide. It won't meet those setback criteria. And it'll behave like it is that neighbor's property and give that wider view that you're looking for of 500 foot. I'll go with the proofs and justification for it, but I'm just telling you some of the specific aspects of it. The rear lot will comply with the setbacks, will comply with the lot frontage and all the other criteria associated with your zoning requirements. The only aspect that was alluded to in the beginning part of this presentation is your resource conservation calculations. When we do those, you get, as Frank said, one and 2/3 lots off of this as opposed to 2 lots. And that's deducting all those different elements of the steep slopes, floodplains, wetlands, even the pond area, even though it was man-made at some point in time, that's still a feature that we have to take deductions for that area.
Excuse me, Ron, could you explain what the resource application calculation is?
Sure, I can go through that. It's on the plan, but I'll spend some time going through that, each one of that, Nick. So,
A good place to look on is the tabulation on the first page of the
Third page.
plans, first cover sheet, left side, environmental resource conservation calculation.
Yeah, here. Down the bottom.
On the left hand.
Yeah,
Yeah,
see that?
right.
And then he'll probably go back and forth from there to the drawing, or you can if you want.
So we start with the tract size. So when we did a survey of the property, the tract size is 22.385 acres. So that's the first number we're starting with. Well, the top of that for any subdivision in Bedminster Township, and in this case in Somerset County, you have to dedicate the right-of-way first. So the first thing that comes off is, I think it's 0.68 acres, and it brings it down to a net gross tract acreage, or the gross acreage for this calculation of 21.73. So 21.73. It has to deduct existing conservation easements, deed restrictions. There are none existing. There will be some proposed, but they're none existing. It has an adjustment factor for that, and again, in this case, it's none, so there's no adjustment factor. Then you have to take out the bodies of water, the areas of floodplain, the wetlands, and the stream corridors. In this case, for the tract, the entire tract, it's 3.43 acres. And it has a factor, a ratio of 1. It takes out the areas of 25% or greater slopes, and we have none that are in and unique, not in the category above. So there's a couple areas that are 25%, but they're already along the stream corridor, so we're not double counting, we're counting the most restrictive for your ordinance. The next thing is areas of slopes of 15% to 25%, in that range. We have 0.19 acres, and in this case you have a factor, a ratio of 0.75. Then it's on the required DEP transition areas of the wetlands. In this case, it's 2 acres of area for that. That's a .75 ratio. It has 300-foot buffers for Category 1 waters. We have none. It's not Category 1 waters. This is, the hoop stick's still a ordinary source and not Category 1, not an ordinary, intermediate source value wetlands and not Category 1. So, but that's irrelevant. So you deduct those, and you'll see those columns. You start multiplying to the right to column C, and then you start adding them up. So the summation of these resource conservation areas is 5.07, which leaves a net of 16.65. We divide it by the density, it's 1.67. That's the number, 1.67. And your ordinance says you round up, not down. You know, it's not going to, you know, or round down, not up, sorry. You're going to 1 lot, not 2 lots or 3 lots or 4 lots. Okay, so that's where it's saying those numbers. So that's how we're coming up with these calculations. So it's detailed. There's a lot more detail than this because we got to take each one of those layers that you see on this plan and calculate each one. But these are the summaries associated with each one of those. So at the end of it, that's what it says, 1.67 acres, and we fall short of that. That when we get into the variance portions of this is a design waiver for this component, not a variance. So it's held to a slightly less standard than a variance condition for there because it's in your design standards. It's not in the zoning component of your ordinance. And I'll talk about that when we get into the planning discussions.
You talked a little bit about DEP permits to do site work on the stream bed, on the wetlands, recognizing that we're taking what exists now for these purposes, but do you anticipate these calculations will change once the site work is done and the stream bed is?
No, not really. To have meaningful, first of all, the floodplain's not going to change based on these. The riparian corridor is based on the banks of the stream, and we're not going to change the banks of the stream, so that won't change. The only thing that, and it can go either way with this, the only thing that would change with time, but we're talking 5-10 years, is the wetlands. Wetlands are always changing. Stream corridors are generally moving around, but it's not short-term, they'd be long-term effects. And on something like this, I couldn't predict whether they get larger or smaller. It's too hard to predict on something of this magnitude that we're talking about here, that it's a small thing. If we were doing a large stream corridor that's much more expansive than that, you could probably calculate that it's going to create more wetlands or to take from wetlands. In this case, I think it's a net the same that would change for that. Speaking of those elements, the DEP elements in there, we still need a host of permits. If this board would entertaining this as an approval, we have to go back to them. Primarily for the bridge crossing, it's going to have to be what I call a 3-sided bridge. There can be no bottom in these. They have to be natural bottoms. They have to meet all certain types of criteria associated with that, both the length of them, the width of them, the span, how it's constructed, all those elements tightly controlled by DEP. But what we're talking about doing in addition to this, that's above and beyond your ordinance, would be to do other enhancements that Jim started talking about, but I want to be a little more specific on some of those things that we're talking about doing there that would be above and beyond. We're talking about along the environmental corridor that's there, we're talking about stream bank stabilization. Okay, whatever, I can say whatever we permit, but what's permitted. Typically, it's the series of coconut logs and plant material that would be planted along here. We think that slope of the stream corridor, the volume that's in the stream corridor, it's a good candidate to put that type of thing in. And again, in other properties that are both upstream and downstream on the hoop stick or the middle brook in your town, we've done that and we've been successful. And I just wanted to show you another exhibit, A5. A5. This is just environmental improvement example photos. And other to say is these are other stream corridors in the neighborhood, in the area, that 5, 6, 8 years later, they look like this. Okay, that are improved with those types of improvements that we're talking about there.
How do these improvements stand up to
Well, events like we've had recently, an Irene or a Sandy, you get the 50-year, 100-year storm. I mean, is that all going to wash downstream, or do these things stand up to those events?
Well, like anything else, as time goes on, the more stable they are, it becomes. In this particular case, you can see that there's not woods along here, okay? In the applicant's case, it's woods along there, which gives it a better benefit as far as harder to grow grass, but it becomes a more stable environment for those larger storms that you can do over here. So what we would expect to do is along these corridors is to do those enhancements and take those areas. Now, with knowing how DEP has worked on other applications, it may not be the entire corridor. It may say they'll only allow us to do certain sections of that. So as Paul's going to want specifically what sections you're going to do is we're going to do a series of sections that we consider the worst that are permittable by DEP. And I can say this from the reviewers, sometimes it's easy with them and sometimes it's a little more challenging. But we think that has a significant environmental benefit if we can do those areas. Other ones that are specific that we know we can get permits for is pond restoration. The outfall's in bad shape. We can get a permit easily to restore that. There are just no littoral shelves. There's nothing up against there. We can add those. Generally, we can get permits to do those types of things. We know there's siltation in there. We don't know how much, but again, we'll probably go and look to silt and desilt those areas. It's not on stream itself doesn't discharge to this. It's just overland flow. So we just don't know how much is in there. But we would say that we would do a pond restoration of this. Spillway, clean out the pond what we can, and again, put grasses around the perimeter of the pond that would be more native grasses that are there.
Ron, would you just explain what you meant by littoral shelves being added to the pond?
So what it would mean is somewhere between 6 inches to a foot to a foot and a half below the water elevation. They would be flat areas that would be below the pond, and it would be below water level that we would actually plant in those areas. So what it would be is vegetation that would come out of that area, and it serves as a buffer or filter. So as water comes off the property, off the land, it goes into that first. It also provides a lot different aquatic and both plant material and also smaller animals that would be in there to have a different environment rather than the just geese flying into a typical pond and flying back out again. It provides different habitat for those areas. So it's a common thing to do in ponds like this.
And it's only for the first few feet of the pond bank, is that correct?
And it wouldn't be around the whole perimeter. It's likely they'll let us do pockets of those. It wouldn't be the whole perimeter, but it would be pockets of that around there. Native plantings, and this would be native plantings in the wetlands transition area, which also includes the area around the pond that we would put native plantings. Right now, it's not. There's invasive plantings that are all in there. So we get permits to get that stuff out and put other things that are in there. Clean up along the stream, and I'll say clean up. There's stuff that's in the stream that we would agree to clean up. And then obviously the removal of the old concrete slab / bridge crossing is to literally, take that out and remove that. We wouldn't have two. There's no need to have a second one in there. It would just be the proposed crossing that's built to today's modern standards and get rid of the other one that's there now. Those are, again, I'll say very specific, very real improvements that we think will benefit not only the property owners that would live there at some point, but also the neighborhood, the community along that stream corridor. Next item that we're talking about of making improvements to is, as Jim talked about, the historic development patterns on the property just haven't been great. However you look at that. We find old farmhouses that have quirky little things, but this is relatively new, and it's just inconsistent, certainly to the way Bedminster has put its zoning plan together, both in the house itself, the area around the house. There's those outbuildings that are really close to the property line, so we're talking about removing all those types of structures. And there's also a whole series of non-native landscaping around the house. And as a condition, we would agree that we'd remove all that landscaping around the house. And I'm not even talking right up against the house, but even 50 foot around the house. There's just, I'll say stuff that's out there. It's all overgrown. And the notion in here, I mean, obviously anyone would say, I want to clean that up. But as a condition of approval, we would say the area around the house would be removed of all that vegetation. And our objective is to have that consistent with the properties that you see both to the east and to the west of this property, is to have those as farm fields in the front.
And Ron, are you proposing to do this removal of the structures before the subdivision is recorded?
Well, Paul put that as an item on there. When talking to both the applicant and the attorney, the only concern about that, as opposed to the traditional bond method, is there's a mortgage on there, on the property, and they don't like removing their asset before you do anything. So, I mean, typically, I think a condition could be is that before any building permits are issued, that the time you become, and bonds would have to be posted, and it's up for discussion, but it becomes an
I
issue.
was going to get to that towards the end, but it gets pretty complicated.
Yeah,
In my
and
opinion, it's actually more complicated than most. For a two-lot subdivision, this is pretty, by the time we talk about these different things that need to be done, it can be difficult. We have to figure out how we do that. I think that's a discussion we have to have at some point, maybe not now, but I think we have to get to it.
okay, but I know the town wants protection that it gets the items that we're talking about get accomplished. I get that. But it's just the fact is we don't want to put ourselves into a hardship condition that just becomes unpractical that you can't do. And if you have a contract to build a structure, a house, and you can go and remove the other house to build a new house, that's pretty straightforward. If we can get the timing that's at the same time of the filing of the map, great. But we just can't take those structures down. Again, the house, not the other outside structures, but the house down with still having a mortgage on it without having a building permit ready to go. So we'll talk about that as part of the conditions. All right.
What about the sheds and barns?
They're easy to take down. There's nothing. They're pretty insignificant as far as removing them.
And wouldn't you want to have, wouldn't we want to have the driveway, common driveway built before the lots are recorded? How else are we going to make sure that gets done? Don't you want to get your permits and be able to take out the concrete crossing and put in the new crossing? And
Yeah.
it's not a public improvement, it's a private improvement. It's going to be owned by the owner of the...
Yeah, there's no public improvement that would be here.
Right.
It's all private side of things.
So
Typically on a project like this, while it's a private improvement, we have always bonded things on a project like this, which would be the stormwater, would be the access, because it is a common driveway affecting more than one lot. And, you know, there are issues associated with that. And part of the complication is the timing on these things. Yes, I understand there may be a mortgage as it relates to the structure on the property. I don't know how that ties to half the land going away if the map is recorded, because it's not on the same property. But things like the pond improvements, channel improvements, those could be done without impacting the mortgage, I would think. That's why we have to, I think, flesh this out in some detail, and it's,
yeah.
again, it's not straightforward.
And I think the new driveway is going right near some of the sheds.
Yeah, it's going through one of the barns.
Yeah, and again, they're easy to remove. That's not affecting the value of a mortgage on that property, those sheds, those structures. So they're not something that I don't think would be a problem to remove and put the driveway improvements and those types of things. And I know on other common driveway applications we bonded for, so that's been something that's been consistent with the town.
Okay, Ron, are you
Let me just go
continuing
through
here?
one other thing. Yeah, I got a couple other just minor things to go through. So just a couple last things. As far as the planning side of things, I just want to make sure, and I can sum up with that before questions, is we're looking for there's two items for relief. The first one is the requirement of a 500-foot lot circle And in this case, the existing tract is 511 foot wide as a rectangle piece. The back lot, proposed lot 1501, will comply. The front lot, because of the 50-foot flag stem for that, would not. So we're looking for relief associated with that. That would be 462 feet as opposed to 500 foot. And the variance would be the consideration of what you hear of a C1 variance as opposed to a C2. Probably most of the variances you hear are C2 variances where the benefits have to substantially outweigh the detriments. In this case, it's a C1 variance where there's exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a lot. There's practical difficulties to comply, and it must relate to a specific piece of property. In case it's a specific piece of property that's been developed for or created some time ago, that's 511 foot wide. Practical difficulties, we can't comply. There's not an issue that if I move this or did this or changed that, the only thing I could comply with is just not subdivide. But it's not because we're getting another lot because of that. It's just the simple fact is I can't comply with the geometry because of the existing constraints that are there or the existing width of the tract that's there. To ameliorate that is the fact is the flag stem itself doesn't have a driveway, doesn't have improvements, and if that needs to be in some type of easement that says that you can't build anything on it, even though it's in setbacks or precludes anyone from trying to do anything on that, the applicant would be willing to do something of that nature. So it gives that neighbor in the front lot the appearance or the view that they have the larger circumference of a 500-foot lot circle. The second item is a design waiver. Again, it's not a variance, it's a design waiver under 13.5.6, and that's for the resource conservation calculations. We've done those, we come up with 1.67 acres. As we've talked about, it can't comply based on those calculations. We can't, they're on lot 15 itself, we're about 1 acre shy. On 1501, which is the back lot, we're 3 acres shy. That's the numbers that when we do the calculations that come into play for that. What we're proposing to do is to do significant enhancements to those stream corridors that we'll be specific about, and I have been specific about, of improving that and making that a much more vibrant area than it is right now, environmentally enhanced that we would do along that. Another aspect that we would talk about and do is with removing of the house that's in the front of any future buyer and ultimate builder, we would have an enhanced setback of 400 foot from Lamington Road. We talk about planting additional street trees along the road itself. That's not generally a condition of approval. And we would talk about buffering of trees along the east side of the property, the common driveway, and it would buffer the neighboring JCP&L substation, and it'd be a benefit both to the homeowners as well as the traveling public going down Lamington Road. And clearly, the additional setback along Lamington Road, I think, would greatly enhance the streetscape along that roadway from where it is now and be more consistent with the other houses that would be in the neighborhood. So, I view this as something that this board could approve because of the additional enhancements that the applicant's willing to make along here, even though it cannot comply with that requirement. All other aspects of your lot size or lot area of 10 acres we comply with. They're both 10-acre lots in great excess of 10 acres. We comply with all the specs associated with this as far as building setback. There's plenty of building envelope. We'll comply with the floor area ratios, the lot coverage, all those other aspects of the plan. It can easily be complied with on here. There was another question too about the size of the houses. We generally show an oversized house. I think I have a 4,000 square foot footprint on there. I never show them small, I show them big. In today's world, we're not sure what's being built. We're building less than more today compared to what we were 10 years ago, but it's a pretty healthy footprint that's on there already, that's put on there. And I have a big circular driveway in the front and show things that people may want to do. I don't want to say that it's just going to be one little narrow driveway with a one-car garage. That's unrealistic. So we're showing a 3-car garage, we're showing the turnaround in the front, we're showing a fairly sizable house that would be on the property. So with that, I do have a couple of the review letters, both Paul's and Frank's. Again, for that question that Paul had about the bonding, All the other items we will comply with that are the technical nature that's on his letter. Frank had a number of questions that I think we've answered. I'm not sure if there's other conditions other than the questions that are on there.
No, I think you've answered the question.
I think, as we talk about the bonding, that also rolls into the stormwater, because the stormwater analysis that's been submitted assumes it's a single project, one stormwater analysis, all the stormwater improvements are done together. So, again, that creates a complication, because effectively you have to have a development plan for both lots in order to get your stormwater done, unless you separate them into separate analyses. And then, again, this is not as straightforward as I want it to be.
And again, we viewed that as those improvements, because of the enhancements to the stream corridor, all done at one time, the stormwater improvements. So,
You may not know the size of the buildings,
and I'm going to
or
say,
the layout of the buildings.
I'm going to take them up to the max. It's the easiest thing to do. Because again, we're talking about the ponds. It's not like getting another dry well or two. These are larger, biofiltration basins, and to make them another, 400 or 500 square foot bigger to handle that additional impervious coverage. I look at it this way, the way we're doing these systems more and more, and we have a fair amount, because of the length of the driveway, of impervious coverage, new impervious coverage that they are already. So it's not just an environ right around the house that you're trying to take care of. It's a larger area that's there. So I look at that as the DEP is going to review this, and they're going to want to see these improvements for stormwater management as well, because they discharge into their stream corridors there that they regulate. So I'm looking at it as the stormwater side of things as one project. And I'll take a more conservative view and make the impervious coverage higher.
And they'll have to be in easements, so the easements will have to be on the final map. There'll have to be a operations and maintenance manual, one for each lot. They'll have to be recorded with the deeds for the lot.
Agreed.
And all has to be tied together.
Mm-hmm. What goes back to your point is you need to do all this stuff before you get the first permit, before the map.
That's what we got to figure out. Is it done before the map is filed? Is it all bonded? I don't know how we do it, because frankly, if we bond the littoral shelves, if we bond the littoral shelves, I don't know, frankly, township was interested in going in there and installing the littoral shelves, or doing the stream corridor improvements. Those should be done. I could bond them to guarantee that they get done. If it doesn't get done, then the township is stuck trying to get that work completed, which is problematic.
Yeah, and I would say this, though, is the aspects of the stormwater management features is something that the town would regularly bond in a major subdivision, correct? So that's straightforward, those things. It's the other enhancements themselves of how do you do that? It's a condition, it would be a condition of any approval. Right. And you would have to state when that condition has to be met before you do the next thing, whether that's a file mat, building permit, whatever it may be. You've got to make sure that those conditions are met. Right. Whether you bond that you did the pond dredge correctly or not, that's a debate for the board of whether you want to do that or not.
Yeah, if I go down the list, the stream bank stabilization, I don't think that's something the township would ever want to be on the hook to do, right. So that would have to be done.
Well,
The
as a practical matter, we don't know what the DEP is going to approve, right? I mean,
that's right, because
they're going to approve some littoral shelves, and they're going to approve some bank management,
mm-hmm. Right.
But we have no idea what. So how do we craft a condition?
Well, no work can be done until those permits are obtained, so
Yeah.
that's the problem.
you see the complication.
Well, that becomes,
I'm leaning towards, recommending that, but let's try to figure it out. It's the big issue is probably whether you're even inclined to grant the approval and the preliminary subdivision, and then what are the conditions of it. So, but a lot of these things are usually, common driveways are difficult to use bonding for because the second guy doesn't want to do it. And the first guy tries to dump it on the second guy. So Not that this gentleman would do that, but it's sometimes good to see it in the field and have it built before people get any rights. But
Right.
Paul has some ideas about that. So, but then the stormwater management, it looks like it's on both lots. It's,
You can't build the driveway without the stormwater management.
yeah. And you've been offering it as an enhancement to justify the waivers and variance. So you may care what time it's done.
I have a question for our professionals. In this situation where we're looking at subdivision in a back lot with a flag, and the flag doesn't have a driveway. So, as a condition of permitting the subdivision, do we need to have a driveway for someone to have access to that rear lot? And so therefore, does the driveway have to be built as long as the subdivision is approved?
That's exactly what Tom is talking about, is the timing of that and the bonding of that or the construction of that prior to the filing of the map. Because when the map is filed, the lot is created. The lot exists.
Right.
So having a flagstaff without a driveway in it is not unusual in Bedminster. We've got them all over the place. But there's always easements for the real driveway, and it's a common driveway, and that gets, in some cases, it's been built before the maps have been filed. So I think that's part of this, and if it,
And a lot of people don't want to bond. Bonds are pretty expensive, and a lot of people don't want to bond on driveways before they even, they almost prefer sometimes to just build them.
because if you bond it, you're basically paying for it twice. You're putting up the bond, then you're doing the work, and then you're getting a bond back.
Right.
And this gentleman is saying he's going to build both houses, so he'll have to figure it out, but that wouldn't be so harsh to say, build the driveway and the improvements before you record the plat.
All right, any other questions from the board? No? Go ahead, Nick, go ahead.
Just a minor point, I think. There are no islands, regulations, or septic tank issues, or anything like that here. That's just normal stuff.
That's a broad statement. I'd say this, is that there's nothing specific on this lot, because we're in the planning area, not in the preservation area. So there's nothing specific, but you've over time have incorporated some of those design objectives in your ordinance changes, and we'll incorporate that into our designs. But there's nothing specific on this lot about islands for it.
Paul, anything else
No, there were a number of comments in my letter, and I think
been
the
answered?
tricky ones relate to timing and sequencing of improvements. And if it seems like I'm a little bit fixated on the details of this one, this is actually, I think, Ron, the first exceptions we've ever had from the resource constraints ordinance since it was adopted.
From my standpoint, it is.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a subdivision that's gone here before.
Okay, all right,
I don't have anything else.
nothing, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
have a question. You're talking about pulling the landscaping around the house out. Obviously, some landscaping has to be done to do the site work to go through the woods from one lot to another. How many trees are we taking down?
I have the calculation there, because you have a tree ordinance replacement
And
ordinance.
the screening is going between the lot line and the driveway?
The screening's proposed to go between,
Or along the front of Lamington Road, or the west of the driveway?
Here it goes here.
First thing is we're proposing street trees along Lamington Road.
Okay.
So street trees along Lamington Road. That'll be part of the replacement tree ordinance that we would do there. In addition, part of the replacement ordinance, we're in excess of it, would be evergreen screening between the proposed driveway and the eastern track boundary. Yeah, the lot line, yeah. And it's primarily focused on the substation along that. That would be proposed along.
And the Lamington Road tree screening, the replacements, are you proposing putting in, I think the minimum in the ordinance is like an inch and a quarter caliper, it's like a tree. Is that what you guys are putting in, or are you putting in?
We're talking about doing something larger than that.
The ordinance says 2.5 to 3 inch
Right,
calipers
yeah,
per tree,
right.
and that's what's
2.5.
proposed.
Great.
No, 2.5, it's not that big a tree.
So unfortunately, your ordinance doesn't give you credit for bigger trees. This ordinance is starting to do that as they get to generation, what do you think, 6 or 7, Frank, of tree ordinances? In all the towns, we have this discussion all the time. Listen, we'll upsize the trees, but you got to work with this on the tree on the other side. When we're cutting them down, you got to get them the way going back up again, because within reason, a larger tree is somewhat better. The downside is most landscapers tell us that relatively the smaller tree, the more success rate it has because it goes into its natural soil and grows better. So if I plant a 6-inch tree in a soil that is in Bedminster that the mayor talked about, generally, unless it's really built well, it doesn't have a great success rate with root balls and of a large tree going into these soils and making its way there, where a 2.5-inch caliper tree has a higher success rate than a larger tree that would go in there. So that's always the balance. But your ordinance doesn't allow for those things. Some of the revisits in other towns are starting to do that, to go up in size. But we're talking about complying with the ordinance in there. And if it's a condition that you want bigger trees, that's fine, but hopefully you can get some relief on the other end of doing that. But in this case, though, we're not taking that many trees out along the stream corridor. It's only a width of the driveway itself. So in other cases, we're removing a lot of trees. In other applications, likely in site plan applications that you see, there's a fair amount of tree removal. In this case, it's only a width of about 30 foot wide, and I think it's 21 total trees that are there with the replacements that are involved. It's not a lot.
Okay, but open it up to the public if anyone has anything. Seeing none? Okay. Do you have another witness? No, that's it. Do you have anything you'd like to say or a summary?
Well, I'm certainly not going to be anywhere near as articulate on the positive aspects of this application. This property sat there on the market for a long time as an eyesore. Mr. Downs saw the opportunity to make a positive impact in a way that makes sense for the community and the natural resources that are there. Under the circumstances, we request the waiver and the C1 variance, and that we be granted preliminary and final, subject to appropriate conditions as discussed. And ideally, I would like to leave to the professionals working of the sequencing of those conditions so that we're able to move forward and satisfy the bank, that it not be, the house doesn't have to be torn down in order to file it. Obviously, we believe that these lots will eventually be custom-built homes for people that love the area, love the site, and want input into what's being built. We don't envision these being spec homes. So we would like to be able to get the plat filed and be able to move forward. Obviously, tear the house down as soon as we go to pull a building permit for that front lot. That would be ideal for us. It seems to me that we're going to have to address the common driveway. But with that said, I would request that the application be approved.
So there's no chance that you would ever sell the front lot with the existing house on it?
No.
If somebody comes out of the woodwork and says, you know what, I love that house, I want it.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it.
I've seen it too.
But, there are
A
unusual
lot of people in this world.
Right.
Angels in the outfield.
Will that be a condition,
I
that house be removed?
I believe that it kind of is a condition because we're agreeing to a 400-foot setback.
well, that's confusing. I mean, if you're offering a 400-foot setback, you're trying to establish a lot that has a building envelope that is further back. I mean, that's the offer. That's
Yeah.
the whole idea. And call it. The bank doesn't mind selling anybody. Okay, the bank begs it over. They don't want to build a new house. They just want to sell it. So, and what about the next house? Do you want the person on? What if our applicant decides to sell and he sells the back lot and he wants the person wants to build their house first?
Why would that be a problem? There's nothing on there.
The house in front of it is the one that you're offering to get rid of. So we
Right.
would have a new house on a common driveway and no removal of the house you say is not consistent with the agrarian character that you're trying to establish, which I respect, but it's half the subdivision. It's half the proposal.
So it would have to be it would have.
I mean, the simplest thing,
conditional
the simplest thing is
they
that
remove the first building?
the simplest thing, I think, is that you have preliminary and you do these improvements and you tear down the house and the sheds and you record the plat after you've done that. And you don't have to bond, well, you have to bond certain things that Paul wants you to bond if you're going to delay them, but you can also do a lot of things on preliminary. So-
You do all the improvements on preliminary subdivision. You just can't get any building permits on the property because the lots aren't created. It's a singular lot. So if preliminary subdivision approval were granted, it's done. And then final subdivision approval gets done after the improvements are complete.
That's not a good way.
Site improvements?
Site improvement.
Site improvement.
And you don't start the site improvements, you don't start any site improvements until all your permits.
Until all the permits are in place.
Including the DEP permits for the enhancement of the stream corridor and the new crossing, removal of the old crossing, the plantings in the stream corridor. There's things that you have been offered to enhance, to justify the design waiver for the resource constraints on the ordinance.
Could you do all the site improvements on the 15B or whatever we're calling it here?
I think
Could you
Ron-
do all the site improvements on 15B without doing them on 15A? No. No, because the stormwater ties together. And you have to get, because it's part of the driveway that goes.
So you really need to tear that house down to complete the balance of the site improvement?
No, those go, in theory, you could build the house in the back, you could build the common driveway, you could do everything that's on that plan, except build the house on the front lot with the old house there.
Yeah.
That could be done. There's no physical impediment to it, except for the fact that you file a map that says there's a 400-foot setback,
Can we-
and the existing home violates that setback.
So we make the resolution contingent upon that factor, or is that not possible?
Well, I don't know, just sitting here thinking about it, almost seems to make sense to me. If you were inclined to grant preliminary subdivision.
And then they
And
come
then have
back
to come
again
back
for
for final,
secondary.
when they've got their permits, when we know what the full extent of the DEP stream restoration permits are and the littoral shelves are, all that is wrapped up before they come back for final. And they get final, it's say, okay, it's done, all improvements are in place, go file your map, create your lots.
Sounds like caution is the better part of valor there. That sounds like if you're going to consider it at all, the way to do it.
Could that be avoided if they developed B first?
I don't know.
Built the house first, and only then tear
I
the
don't think so.
old house down?
I
Because then their mortgage is in place, they still have an improved property.
Yeah, but it's on a different lot.
I don't think, I'll let Tom talk this, I don't know if we want to get
I'm not
involved
gonna-
in
We're not
figuring out
going to
the
worry
mortgages.
much about mortgages, that's their problem.
Okay.
I really don't think that matters, although, since it was raised, technically, the creation of a subdivision and the alienation, the sale of a portion of a property that's mortgaged is the default of a mortgage, because there's a reduction in the value of the mortgaged property or an alienation. So the reason we don't get into real estate is you don't judge real estate. And that's not a basis for granting a variance, okay? We sort of ignore the mortgaging variances. But I think we have to focus on the practical and subdivision. Preliminary with conditions is the step at which something is authorized and protected for a period of 3 years against changes in the ordinance. That is something they're asking for. You can separate preliminary from final. You could also grant final with conditions, and you can establish the conditions you're willing to grant the variances and the...
Would you like to take a 5-minute break? You want to talk about this situation? You want to take a 5-minute break and to have
I
a
think
situation?
just like 2 minutes, because we kind of had a separate caucus on this.
Well, we'll take a 5-minute. We'll take that, and you talk about it, and we'll come back, okay?
Can we just wait for Frank?
We'll wait for
I'll
Frank?
be right back.
All right.
Land use planner and expert. We've decided to withdraw our request for final division approval. At this point, we would request that you grant us preliminary, which will give us the ability to go to the DEP, get the permits, come back, and when we're ready to come back for final, at least we'll have some of this stuff delineated, the DEP and those sensitive areas delineated so that the conditions of final will be more clear-cut and we'll be in a better position.
I think that's a good decision on your part. Uh-huh.
Just ask one thing. If we withdraw, do we have to make all new filings and application fees and everything else? We've done it once already. So
We could reserve jurisdiction as long as you extend the time frame for action on it indefinitely until you have obtained your other permits. And seek it. You can reinstate by, if the board's willing to. I mean, I'm not in charge of that, the board is, but
We would request that at that
We'll
rate
do
as
that.
well.
And I think you'll have to do new plans because it'll show all the easements will be locked up by then.
And we'll have compliance
Yeah.
preliminary anyway, so all the plans would have to be redone and refiled.
Fine by-
Right. Okay,
so
Tom.
the board, it might be good if the board wanted to at least have a polling of
Okay.
how you feel about it. I don't need you to, if you don't want to, but I just need to understand whether you're inclined to
Okay,
answer it or not.
let's open it up to the board if anybody has any comments.
I'm okay with the preliminary.
I'm inclined to grant the preliminary.
Yep,
Uh-huh.
I agree.
Yeah? Okay, I think, Tom, we're in agreement.
The board is considering a motion to approve the preliminary subdivision approval with the conditions offered by the applicant this evening. The final subdivision is withdrawn, and the board withdrawn, except that the filing is still before the board, the board has jurisdiction to restart the final after the conditions of preliminary have been obtained and the applicant has resubmitted the maps to reflect compliance with the conditions. And they'll comply with the reports of the township's professionals, Paul and Frank. They will obtain the NDP permits that they're discussing. It will include enhancements of the stream corridor and the pond with literal shelves and for the pond and all of the things that they talked about those enhancements. The replacement of the existing concrete crossing with a more modern, environmentally friendly crossing as described by Mr. Kennedy. They'll undertake, there will be some degree, there'll have to be some degree of leads-like requirements that they will propose for the houses on the lots. They're not prepared yet to specify the structures because they want to be custom homes, but there should be something that is given more specificity by the applicant in a general way, which
We get that language as part of the final subdivision?
That's what I was going to ask.
I have a question about that. I mean, we're approving a subdivision on structures that really, we don't know what they, the size or the scope of them. Why are we looking to, the sustainability and the environmental issues seem to have a lot more to do with the wetlands and the land as opposed to buildings that we don't even know size and scope of. Why are we looking to put a requirement on?
Well, I don't think we are. I think that could be a
Well,
condition of
the
final.
only reason why I brought it up is because the applicant brought it up, and I thought it was part of the...
No.
rationale for
I
the
understand
approval.
that the applicant came forward and brought it up and
right.
said, I will do this, I will do that. My point is, this is a subdivision that also could change hands someday. And do we want to hamstring, maybe it won't be this applicant, maybe it'll be another one. It's nice that he wants to do that. I hope that would work for his marketing and his sales, but I don't know if this governing body needs to be that tight.
Yeah, I don't think it should be part of the preliminary
No.
at all. I don't think it should. It should be, because we're talking about the
conditions that
land.
are running with the land, that
We're
are,
talking
the way
about
the
the-
land is going to be managed are really the benefits that he's offered. He's going to get rid of what he's characterized as an eyesore, and he's going to improve the environmental characteristics on the site.
Right,
Those are the things I think you're using as the basis for his relief.
right, I agree.
There'll be, in this draft motion, there'll be no specific requirements about the leads like design. And the timing of final subdivision shall also be subject to the review and approval of the township engineer, the planning board attorney, and the township planner. But it's not being granted now, and the board keeps the application with the right of the applicant to restart it upon the completion of the conditions of the preliminary to the satisfaction of the township engineer. Be no new fee required, and no new application has to be filed for final. The board is keeping jurisdiction. Okay?
But new maps will be just for the preliminary work. Okay, we need a motion for our proposed resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Trina?
Mayor Parker?
Aye?
Mr. Tracco?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. B?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Mr. Travisini?
Aye.
Ms. Patrick? Aye. And Ms. Frenchco.
Aye.
Good luck.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Larry, would you like to take care of your situation now? Because you and the mayor will be leaving. Our next application is for zoning, so.
Fishing on your pond.
So I saw this case go by, and I just want to reach out to Tom. I thought it's on a couple of zoning issues that are big in the news, touch on a few issues. You see the news across the state, whether it's some of our next door towns, some of the stuff that you might hear about down in Ocean County as well. And I thought it would be good for Tom just walk us through this case, what happened and how the court decided.
Seen it already?
Yeah, but, yeah, some of the interesting things about it are pretty fairly unusual, but they do happen. That is that there was a situation where the case was sought on appeal to the Superior Court Law Division, and that was dismissed for failure to comply with the 45-day rule, which is a rule of court that requires complaints to be filed within you have to pursue your administrative remedies. It's a state court rule. And the person who had been denied the permit for the conversion of the home to the tax-free house of worship type, or a residence for a church principal, was who had been denied the permit to convert, challenged it, but didn't pursue an appeal at the Board of Adjustment. So didn't pursue his administrative rights. And on the case law for New Jersey, it's fairly clear that, generally speaking, the rule is you must pursue your appeal to the board of the zoning board. You sit as a land use board, so you do both planning board and zoning board. Larry and Steve don't sit on the zoning board type cases. So they should have gone to the zoning board, and they didn't, and they sued, and they were dismissed. They simultaneously sought to assert their First Amendment and other rights in federal court while they thought they were still in state court, and they were dismissed there for lack of ripeness under a similar doctrine, not exactly identical, but it's the Williamson County doctrine, and it is often the defense of a zoning case brought in federal court of any type, but it's particularly often a case in these types of cases, and sometimes this didn't get as far as a RLUIPA case, but we've talked about it before. The Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act is, as I described it to you before, is overwhelming. Remember the doctrine I described to you? Religious institutions have God on their side, the First Amendment on their side, and got the federal government with RLUIPA on their side. So I think that that's a big deal. And that's, if you ever have one of those cases, you will know a big deal. So this person didn't quite make the claim well about that, didn't use the RLUIPA, did try to assert the rights, and was dismissed in federal district court for failure to exhaust and seek administrative remedies under the Williamson County case, and went to the appellate division. The Third Circuit, though, overrides the federal district courts, and that was summarily dismissed. Their case was summarily dismissed by the Third Circuit. So it helps you see that you are a critical, and the zoning board critical entity in the administrative appeal process of pretty much any zoning permit, including things that involve people trying to assert tax exemption for being a tax-exempt church or a tax-exempt religious home. It also helps you see that there are certain defenses. There can be time bars to people, and that's sort of what happened to this person. That they didn't undertake the appeal that was available to them. You know, maybe they thought they would lose, and one of the ways around the 45-day rule is to say, I don't have to go to the zoning board because it would be futile. And the cases that often happen in RLUIPA cases, federal courts often say they agree that it would be futile. So this was a RLUIPA case. But so what does that mean? That means that they can get around the 45-day rule for state court, or get around Williamson County by asserting positions that help convince the court to give them relief, even though they haven't gone to the local board for a use variance.
So Tom, the fact that, locally, we see some of the zoning board decisions being contravened to some extent by the federal government and the federal courts. This seemed to be a case that said, no, we're maintaining the authority of the local zoning board, and the federal courts are not going to intervene and give a contrary decision to the locals. Now, does that mean that the appellants here still have the opportunity to go back to perfect their authority? It
appears, according to the recitation of the Superior Court decision, that they have lost that right by lack of time. That's probably the status, but what people usually do in a setting like that, and we've talked about this too, is res judicata, the principle of res judicata applies to administrative and judicial proceedings. Well, but it's for the same case. So res judicata is a bar against cases brought by an applicant for the same case. It was already decided, either by the Superior Court or the Federal Court or Higher Court, or by the Board. How do you get around that rule? You change your application. And you change in substantial ways, but in ways that might not seem that substantial to the layperson, but they are a change in the facts of an application, then they are not barred by the doctrine of res judicata. I'm not saying he's going to do that.
Right.
But what these rulings are, which is very interesting, is they're sort of procedural rulings. It's over. You didn't pursue your appeal. You lost. You're out of time. You lost at the state level, and you are not ripe here at the federal level. The federal level would say, we'll go back to the administrative agency and seek it. The state would say, you lost your time on that. And the board there might say, well, you didn't appeal within the time period that you had to come back to this board, and so it's barred by the doctrine of res judicata. That's for future case determination. What
Did the
happens?
court actually make the decision, or did they push it back to the state?
They're both decided. In other words, the state had already dismissed the case, and the feds refused to hear the case, so they dismissed. Now, dismissal for failure for rightness is not a permanent blockade. It means you have to go process your administrative appeal at the state or local level first, and after you do, if you prove you have been infringed of your First Amendment rights or your other rights that you're asserting, you get to bring that case in federal court. But that can be years or extensive time and cost to get there. So the bottom line is, in most of these cases that are an appeal, there's usually some effort to either get around the 45-day rule or to be able to say that it would be worthless, futile, to even try to go for a administrative proceeding.
I understood it that they didn't go to the Board of Adjustment to start with.
That's right, and that's one of their
Right.
checks on time was not to appeal that, and that's why they lost at the state court.
But if they didn't go in the first time, how do they appeal? If they didn't,
Because what they do is they say, they don't show it all here because that's the state court case, but
Yeah.
basically they say, if they're smart, it was futile for me to go to the zoning board of that town because they were out to get me. Whatever.
Yeah.
They come up with some explanation of the reason for getting around the 45-day clock and around the doctrine under that rule to exhaust your administrative remedies.
where does the 45 days come in? That's the part I don't
That's what-
understand, if they didn't go there in the first place.
Well,
Got denied by the zoning.
the zoning officer's denial constitutes,
Yeah, but
but that's where if you want to sue on that, they sued on that, and they had 45 days to sue on that, and by suing, and then they lost that suit because
Okay.
they didn't go to the zoning board.
Yeah, well, that part.
But how did they get around this? If I was smart, if I was their attorney, I'd find a way to go back to the zoning board with a substantially different application.
Yeah, right. Same, only different.
I'd be there. I probably wouldn't have done this lawsuit. I probably would have
No.
gone to the zoning board, I would
Yeah.
have gotten the denial at the zoning board and gone up to either the federal or state court. And that's the way you more efficiently actually get a record and can win.
Sure.
And that's in sense what has happened in some of the House of Worship cases
Right.
where there is a record and then there's still litigation.
Right.
And there's still federal or state jurisdiction, or both. And the litigation in the RLUIPA cases are very controversial, and the statute has a rule, a statutory provision, that the successful plaintiff is entitled to attorney's fees, which is the
Okay.
English
Anything else?
rule by statute. And
My only comment on it was, I found the most interesting part of it was, during pendency of litigation, I am virtually certain this plaintiff was here talking to the zoning officer and I, looking to put in exactly what he did not get in Warren Township.
Yes.
Oh, you can't.
I did not know it was the same, but when I saw this case go by, I said, you know, there was a group that was looking at some properties in town and had talked about converting single families and some larger properties to student dormitory, and they had conversations with Frank and others in town, and, you know, what Warren just went through, it could have been Bedminster. And so I find it interesting because I didn't realize that it probably was the same folks, but it certainly paralleled what we had just gone through. And then the fact of, you know, the federal courts actually ruling on the sides of the local authorities, which,
Good.
That was it.
Okay. Well, let's not hold up our...
Consider this part of your LUPA training because there's reasons why you have to have it, okay? So.
Okay. Okay, gentlemen, you're excused.
See you at Full Fest.
Yes.
My only comment.
Yep.
See you at Full Fest.
Yep. See you at Fall Fest.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, good weather.
Okay, you're up. Your turn.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, members of the Land Use Board, members of the public. My name is Francis P. Linus. My law offices are in Somerset, New Jersey, and I'm pleased to represent Crossroads Business Center today in tonight's proceedings. By way of background, what is now known as Crossroads Business Center was originally approved by the Planning Board in 1987. There are two buildings, two office buildings located on the site. They're the same office buildings with no changes that have been there since 1987. The other relevant prior approval came before the Land Use Board in 2010. That's when the Wellness Center, which now occupies the adjoining lot, received preliminary and final subdivision approval, amended site plan approval, and C&D variances relating to this property as well. Tonight, we're here very simply to amend the preliminary and final site plan approval to increase the number of parking spaces on site. We're also here for a D4 use variance, which I believe is a technical variance because the floor area ratio has not changed. We're here to document the floor area ratio that exists as a result of the subdivision that was granted in 2010. For the purpose of the board members who were here at that time and those who weren't here, the Wellness Center took over for the Johnson House, what was formerly known as the Johnson House on that site. If approved, we're going to be reducing the number of the parking nonconformity by adding 60 additional parking spaces, and we'll be seeking an increase in the impervious lot coverage from 61% existing to 63.46%, and that's a variance that we'll be seeking. I have with me tonight three witnesses. My first witness is Craig Stiers. He's our professional engineer. He's the applicant's civil engineer. He will demonstrate before the board and the public the site plan and what we're proposing, what exists, and what we're proposing tonight. Our second witness is Richard Merlis. Richard is the executive managing director of Colliers International. That's a real estate firm, commercial real estate firm. He'll testify as to the need for additional parking in today's market. And then finally, we have Christine Cafone. She's our planner, professional planner, and she'll testify in support of the variances. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Craig Stiers and have him sworn in.
Thank you. Mr. Stiers, raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name, spell your last name, and give us at least a business address.
Craig Stiers, S-T-I-R-E-S, 43 West High Street, Somerville.
All right, Craig, will you give the board members, the public who are here, the benefit of your background, qualifications, and experience?
If you don't, unless you really want to, the board recognizes and accepts Craig's qualifications as a professional engineer.
Thank you. All right, will you explain to the board what your involvement is with the subject application, preparation of the site plan?
Yes, we prepared the site plan that is before you tonight, as well as the application.
You want to proceed with your testimony?
Sure. I have two exhibits.
Craig, can you take your hands off?
First exhibit is an aerial of the area.
the A1. You can mark it.
Yep, got it. As Frank said, it's the Crossroads Business Center, which is located off of Burnt Mill Road, and then kind of orient you with the aerial plan. North is to the left. You have 202, or to the top of the plan here, Burnt Mill Road on the east side, and then Pluckman Way, which is actually part of the lot going bisecting through the middle of the property. The subject lot is Lot 6, as well as Lot 1 in Block 5701. Lot 1 is the detention basin for the site. And to give you some background of which kind of plays into the justification of it, especially the floor area ratio. This site was part of 1987 approval, like Frank said, that included 2 buildings right here, as well as the 3rd building on what is now Lot 7. There were 2 separate applicants at the time. The Lincoln Properties developed this property, and then Prism Realty developed this property in the overall. One of the things that we showed on the plan, and the reason we reference back, is that if you look at the current zoning right now, you see the FAR of 0.135 and the coverage of 35%. And then all of a sudden you see what we have is our FAR is almost 0.3 and our coverage is over 60%. And you're like, wait a minute, this site is way overdeveloped. But the reason that we want to bring up the original approval was that this is a fully conforming site at the time of the approval. It was a planned commercial center, which was a conditional use of the village neighborhood district. So like I said, at the time, this was a completely conforming site plan and development with 60% coverage and 0.295 for the FAR. As Frank said, there was also an additional approval in 2010, which we were part of, that subdivided the Wellness Center, which was formerly the Johnson House. The Wellness Center leased property and leased the space from the Lincoln Properties for a number of years. And then obviously with the success that they have had in treating and helping cancer patients, they wanted to break off on their own. So in 2010, they were able to break off a half acre of the property, which they got approval for. Nothing particularly changed, except there was just kind of that exception out of the property. Hence the reason for the increase of the FAR on our property because of just the reduction of land area. So the FAR went over the permitted, and then also the lot width because of the breaking out of the property itself, and then also the coverage increased. So although nothing changed on this property, a couple of variances kind of were triggered because of that stipulation. Now to the application before you. The current owners recently purchased the property, and they are looking to, at this point, increase the number of parking spaces on the site. In reference to the aerial, and then I'll show you on the back side, is they're looking to reconfigure the existing parking lot in this area, and then there's a grassed area in the front of the building, just between the building and Pluckerman Way, that they're looking to add a 32-car new parking lot. So it's essentially a new parking lot of 32 cars, and a reconfiguration of the existing lot that would generate another 28 parking spots for a total of 60 new parking spots.
And just so we focus on existing conditions, right now there's 472 parking spaces on site,
Yes,
and that's deficient.
yes.
Okay. And
Square footage?
What's that?
How much square footage is the big building?
The 2 buildings are 132,100 square feet.
Total.
Total, yes.
and the proposal, if approved, is to add 60 spaces, which would bump it up to
Right.
528 spaces, 532, and 12 spaces are reserved for wellness.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. That was the other thing, as part of the wellness approval, they essentially got
12 parking spaces allocated to that. So although we're showing 472, really 460 are for these two buildings on site. So again, the need for additional parking. And as Frank said, going back to the original approval, like I said, everything complied, including the parking. Now the ordinance has changed so that now it's 1 per 2.5. So now what we're trying to do is, it's almost twofold, is that the fact that we're trying to get closer to the ordinance, which is, I guess I would say, a theoretical look at it, but also the realistic look that the site and trying to get tenants into the building, they need more parking. So that realistic process is that they actually, no matter what we do, yes, we're getting closer to the ordinance requirements, but the real need is additional parking to get tenants into that building, which there will be additional testimony later on.
How many, what's required right now for the amount of square footage you have? What's required?
The requirement is 587.
587, and you have 460.
472.
Well,
460.
460, correct. There's
Okay.
12 allocated to the wellness center.
Okay, so this still won't bring you up to your full requirement,
Correct.
but you will get closer.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the other thing is, like we've shown on the, I have the landscape plan colored up, there's another exhibit.
You've marked that A2. Would you identify that, please?
It's a landscape plan, colored version. Like I said, we are really reconfiguring the existing parking lot, which would generate 28 spaces, so there's really not too much of an increase in coverage, obviously, in this area. But with the new parking lot, it's a little bit more substantial. And that'll take us from 61% coverage to 63.2% coverage. To account for that additional impervious coverage, we are going to modify the outlet structure in the existing detention basin, which is down in, across the street from on Burtnell Road. That will account, that modification will allow us to maintain the rate of flow, although there's an increase in impervious coverage. The rate of flow from the site will be maintained through that modification. Additionally, we will be providing some additional, we will be taking down 27 trees, which are primarily in the area of the new parking lot. But we will be providing additional landscaping around that parking lot, and also a hedgerow along Flushing Way, which would essentially, if you've been by there, that there's an existing hedgerow in front of the existing parking lot. So the hedgerow we have proposed would essentially match that and buffer that new parking lot.
Did you have an opportunity to review Mr. Ferrera's 9/30/17 report, the engineering report?
Yes.
I want to provide testimony with respect to our comments with respect to that?
Sure. I mean, all the comments that he has, we agree to. I think it's more, they're more statements than anything else. Responding to the 88 comment is that with the 520 parking spaces allocated to the buildings, the ADA requirement is 2% of that, which is 10 spaces, which is what we have proposed for us.
Handicap.
You see that's complying.
Is that an increase of the current? Are you doing more than you currently have?
I believe we're maintaining it, but the requirement is 10. And they are spread out in the southern parking lot, the northern parking lot, as well as the modification that we're making. As far as the tree removal, as you can see on the aerial itself, the lot is it's either parking lot, and then on top of that, it is well landscaped. So as far as trying to put any type of replacement trees in, I don't know if there's really an area that we could enhance to get any more replacements in.
Don't we have a program where replacement trees can be planted elsewhere?
They're banked?
No.
We don't. We do not have a program. We should.
As far as the loading, and because what we're doing is, you can see in this area right now, there is a lane that comes around, and then this is somewhat of a drop-off or a drop-off area for the parking lot, maybe a UPS delivery, but there is a loading area in the back. When we spoke to the applicant, all the deliveries and UPS deliveries are actually brought back here anyway, so I really don't see that much of an impact as far as that modification. As far as the dead-end aisle, what Paul is suggesting is to eliminate one of the parking spots and shorten it, so when you come in, there's an area that you can turn around if the parking lot is full. You can't back out. No problem with that. As far as modification of the light, getting some additional details, that's fine. The construction details are fine. And the drainage report is really just statements of what we've done.
The biggest comment there relates to an O&M manual for the future maintenance of the system.
Right. With comments, we've actually started the cleanup of the basins. It got a little bit overgrown, so they've gone in there and kind of cleaned it out, but I think there's still some silt that needs to be taken out of the bottom.
Okay, what I would request is, just for our record keepings with the DEP and our municipal permit, when it's done, take some photographs and just send it to me with a cover letter so we can file it.
Okay, not a problem. So that's really all Paul's comments.
All right, you have an opportunity to review Frank Banish's October 4th, 2017 review report.
Yes.
To discuss your comments with respect to that report.
Um, 2.2 is a statement regarding the parking. 2.3 is the same thing regarding the lot width, which I've discussed already. As far as lines, the parking area, the landscape, the existing lot, we're not changing the existing lighting. Again, that was approved as part of the original approval. The proposed light that we are having as part of the addition, or the new parking lot, substantially matches what is out there as far as the lighting, but it is an LED light, so the look, or the configuration, I guess you could say, is similar to what is out there, but it will be an LED. And again, I kind of mentioned, we are providing landscaping around the proposed parking lot and some enhancements in the modifications that we're doing. 2.5 is really just talking about the different types of landscaping. 2.6 is a statement about the lighting, like I just said. The 2.7 regards the question about the mitigation of the impervious coverage and the stormwater protection act, the modification of the basin. 2.8 mentions the need for the additional parking, and we'll have an additional testimony regarding that.
All right, I'd like to comment on 2.8. We obviously don't know what the future may hold. We would reserve our rights to come back before the board at a future date should additional parking be needed, and of course you would judge that application on the merits of that application.
Yeah, right, sure.
2.9.
2.9 is just the outside agencies.
And what other outside agencies have jurisdiction over this matter? We appeared before the Historic Preservation Commission in September, and what did the Historic Preservation Committee report?
They approved it. Also, with the Soil Conservation District, we have approval from that already. And then the only comment for the county is to modify the handicap ramps out on Burnt Mill Road. So make them comply with the current standards.
Okay.
All right, I have no further questions.
Board, any further questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you speak to us, maybe it's for another professional, to the occupancy of your buildings? And are you at full occupancy and there's not a parking, or, because basically...
That's our next witness.
There's a need for parking.
That's our next witness.
Okay.
A question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, since you're taking away essentially the front of, and this may be for another one, this too, the front of access to the buildings and confining it all to one area now because you're having parking in front of here, do you foresee any issues with, fire lane or emergency vehicles getting in and out of that building?
No, I don't believe so. The driveway that's existing along the building is still, adequately wide enough.
How wide is it?
Excuse me. I believe it's at least
25, 24? Yeah, okay. All right.
Paul, anything more? No. No? Frank, anything more? Frank?
I did want to just check with Craig. Craig, are there
Yeah.
any easements that allow parking from this lot to parking on the Prism? It was previously Prism lot, and vice versa. Is there shared parking at all?
specifically written in agreement that it is not shared.
Not shared.
Not sure. Mhm.
Doesn't feel it happens, huh? The whole area.
Yeah, that's too bad. Okay, open it to public. Any,
I have a question for Paul,
Astrid?
if I may.
Yeah.
I know it doesn't probably count as permeable surface, but is there any advantage to using porous asphalt in this application?
In my opinion, no. I mean, generally, where you would use a permeable pavement like that, a permeable asphalt, would be if you need to address water quality standards based on the DEP rules. This is not going there. They don't need to do that. While permeable asphalt is okay to use, you have to have the right soil conditions. I recall when this road was constructed, the main road was constructed through there, it was pretty bad. A lot of clay material, not the kind of material you'd want permeable pavement.
Wouldn't make a difference what you topped it with.
Like putting it on plastic.
Okay, all right, all right.
Okay.
So the applicant knows, the board has previously heard an application in a similar location and heard about modern parking demands, and our ordinance is higher. So all of that is something the board is familiar with and approved a increase in parking in a similar office building, so at least nearby. So just so the applicant is aware. So.
Okay, Madam Chairperson, did we open to the public? Or-
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yes, so we can have your next witness. Mhm.
Richard Merlis?
Mr. Merlis, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
And please state your name and spell your last name and give us at least a business address.
Richard Merlis, Mirliss, 300 Henry's Parkway, Parsippany, New Jersey.
Richard, will you give the board members of the public who are here the benefit of your educational, professional background, qualifications, and experience?
Sure. 20 years in commercial real estate, specifically focused on leasing office buildings and representing office tenants in northern New Jersey.
Qualifications, Mr. Khan?
Yes, the board will recognize and accept Mr. Merlis as a commercial real estate expert. Please go ahead.
Okay. You are the executive managing director of Colliers International in Parsippany, is that not correct?
I am.
And how long have you served in that capacity?
I've been there for 5 years.
And what were you asked to do with respect to this particular project?
So we were hired at the beginning of 2017 to lease the asset. The building, subsequent to the new owner buying the building, basically went to 50% plus or minus occupancy when we got involved with the asset and were hired. And so That's our role, is to lease the space, the empty space.
I'm going to show you the document that we're going to mark. You identify it. I think we're up to
It's three.
A3.
I'm going to identify this.
You identify the document?
This is the rent roll for the building.
Thank you. You can give me this. I'll pass them, Joe. Thank you. Mhm.
Sure.
Mhm. 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 Sure.
Okay, you want to provide testimony with respect to the vacancy rate or the other items in that document?
Sure. Yeah, we're at approximately 36% vacancy, 64% occupancy. One of the buildings, there's two buildings there. One of the buildings, building 2, is now 100% occupied by one tenant, Ellis Healthcare. The other building has plus or minus 2 full floors available, and the first floor is leased at this point.
All right, what does your experience tell you when you're trying to put together a commercial landlord in an office building in this area with a commercial tenant? What are they interested in? Parking?
So just quick high level, when these buildings were built, the average ratio of people to square footage was about 250 to 300 square feet per person. It's now down to about 150 square feet per person, so almost double the requirement. So when this building was built in 1987, you had approximately a 3.4 parking ratio. The average tenant's needs now are approximately 4.5 to 6 per thousand in an ideal world.
So based on your study and based on your experience, 60 additional parking spaces that we're proposing warranted under the circumstances?
Absolutely.
All right, I have no further questions.
Board?
Rich, you're showing the moving time here with the rent rolls.
Right.
Historically, those buildings have been pretty well leased, correct?
I believe so, yes. I wasn't involved with them prior, but I believe so.
Where it was Allergan or some of the other tenants who had been there long-term. Merck had a bigger, looks like, I think I remember Merck or one of its subsidiaries having a bigger stake at one point, but this is really a function of recent circumstances.
As I recall, going back before the current ownership owned it, Spear Street struggled with it as well. They were the prior owners of the asset. So, again, I apologize. I wasn't intimate with the asset, so I don't remember, the true vacancies, et cetera. But all I deal with.
Where I'm going is the vacancy here more typical of the rest of the township, or what's the vacancy across the?
So I'll give you an example. Directly across the street, Hills Drive. You're probably familiar with the asset. They're at basically 50% occupancy. They have 2 buildings and they lost NPS Pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. So just in the immediate vicinity, we have sort of a similar issue.
And that's the application that came in to expand their parking based on.
That was that one. Okay. Right.
Okay. So overall, occupancy is down, it's kind of turning over. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you see it moving from a more professional occupancy, accountants, lawyers, professionals, brokers, and things like that, to more of an operational type of thing as you lease up additional
Yeah,
space?
I just think space design, layout, how people collaborate, everything's changed. And even if you went with offices, the size of the offices have shrunk dramatically.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have 12 by 12, 12 by 15s. Even if you have offices, they're 10 by 10s, right? So just by the very nature, they're trying to pack more people into smaller space.
And then
right?
require more parking for the smaller suites.
Exactly.
That's where you're headed with this.
That's exactly right. And it's sort of a pervasive problem across every suburban submarket in northern New Jersey.
As you go from 3.5 to 4.5, what are we going to end up with here? 4.5 at the end of the day?
Oh, no.
No, the demand is 6, but when you get to
to
520, what is that? That's a little less than 5?
Yeah.
A little bit less than 4?
It's under, yeah. I mean, you're not even, you know, my point being is you need that and then some in an ideal world to be competitive in the
So,
marketplace.
and as you go to do that, are you still finding that your tenants are still requiring the same portion of reserve parking?
Yeah, 1 per
At the same time?
thousand.
So I go from 1 per 3.4 per thousand to 4.1 per thousand, and I still have a tenant that wants 10% of the space is reserved?
I haven't seen it so much as a percentage. I think the ratio still seems to hold, the 1 per thousand. I haven't seen that much on the reserve side.
So as you get this additional parking,
Right.
and with the idea that it's still not going to meet your needs, because stated needs are in excess of 5, and we're not getting close to that.
Right.
Operationally, is there any plan to change the way parking is managed at the site? With respect to reserve and how reserve is accommodated and so forth?
Yeah, I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. I think we're kind of dealing with what we can do right now, is my impression. You know, I think, right, that's sort of, maybe you can elaborate on that. They're asking why we're applying for only 60, is that right?
My question is really, how do you mitigate the difference between what your tenants are asking for?
Right.
And what you're physically able to accomplish?
Yeah, it's a good question. I reserve that for ownership. Yeah.
Basically, my only comment was to a portion of Mr. Vanish's report. I just did not want to foreclose the future opportunity to come before the board, and if more parking is needed, then we'd have to prove the case, just as we're trying to prove a case today.
My ultimate point is this. If a tenant is asking you for more parking per thousand, they have to sacrifice the amount of reserve spots, because the worst thing to see is a bunch of reserve parking spots that are vacant day in, day out.
Right.
For guys who travel or are out of the office for weeks at a time, and you can't accommodate your parking requirement. That's why I'm asking about how operations may change in order to accommodate this, because otherwise you will be back in 6 months for 20 more spots. And I think what we would be curious to know is, how are you going to...
Yeah, I think
you know,
maybe I'm not getting the question, but I think the concept of the reserve is in the ratio, right? And rather than it being reserved for individuals, it's reserved for the company these days, right? So they're not being utilized.
Exactly.
That's
exactly where I'm going.
Yeah, right.
Exactly
So
where I'm
that's
going.
how it's being done today. In answer to your question, it's not like so-and-so spot and nobody parks there. It's just a company designated spot. And I think on a go-forward basis, it would be the exact same.
I think it's important for us to know how they manage that and how they're mitigating that. Because if that is the case, that'll make us feel more comfortable that, again, you're not coming back a year from now for 10 more spots or doing crazy.
Half of the space that's vacant.
Yeah.
Closer to your max.
Yeah, I mean, again, I deal more in the here and now on the demand side, as you know, you're in the same problem.
I'm dealing with the same problem.
We have an answer. We have an answer. Great.
Well, I think if we could have gotten 200 more, we would have. We went through a number of iterations, and unfortunately, that's why I think if you look at your report, it originally said 48 and it's really 60, is we missed that little bit of the update on our cover sheet. But, I mean, we tapped everything out of this that we possibly could. We tried some more stuff in the existing parking lot where we were creating dead ends. And when we had the ball, you know, it kind of went by the wayside because you'd rather see it flowing through. So at this point, we're tapped out. I mean, if we could have gotten 200, we'd be here for 200 at this point. So I think that's really the answer that you're looking for.
They can't accommodate any structured parking on this site, correct, Paul?
That'd be a whole different,
It's only money.
whole different conversation.
They seem to spend OPs, other people's money.
For practical purposes, when you look at the site, they're using everything that can be used without having it look like they've really taken out every buffer there was, so there's not a lot of potential for more. They're doing everything you can to help this site, and we do know that there's a need for more parking.
I have a question for you. So basically, at this point, you're about 50% occupied?
64%.
64% occupied, so you have
36%.
36% unoccupied, and you don't have enough parking for that 36%, or you're anticipating that if you ever got to something like close to 100%, you would need additional parking?
So I'll give you an example. So we had a request for proposal from a big tenant about a month and a half ago. And right on the RFP, they asked for 500,000 parking. And I think the issue is more, you know, sort of trying not to be functionally obsolete, right, from a building perspective, and being able to handle today's tenants' demands. And so what happens is all of a sudden, if there's 5 or 10 buildings on a list that a tenant could go to, and one of the first criteria is the parking ratio and the densification of my layout, you get knocked off the list right away. And so I think what we're attempting to do here is to stay relevant by offering as much parking as we possibly can.
And if you have a higher occupancy rate, it's better for the township.
I would add
Absolutely.
more people spending on it, right?
Absolutely.
Make those widgets.
Okay.
Make those widgets.
Yeah, all right. Paul, anything more? No? Okay. Frank, anything further?
No.
No. Okay, I'll open up to the public again. Seeing none?
Thanks, Rich. You got it.
Okay,
Christine Cafone?
okay.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address.
Christine Ann Cafone, C-O, F as in Frank, O-N-E. Business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07701.
Mr. Cafone, will you give the board members and members of the public who are here the benefit of your background, qualifications, and experience?
Yes, good evening, Chairman and members of the board. I am a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. I don't think I've testified here in Bedminster, but I've testified before about 380 other planning and zoning boards throughout the state of New Jersey. My firm participated in the lifetime application, although I believe Justin, my colleague and associate, did the testimony on that. So I haven't actually been here. I have a master's degree in city and regional planning from Rutgers. I teach planning and zoning courses for the Rutgers Center for Government Services. I was also an adjunct land use instructor at the Kislak Institute at Monmouth University. My firm also does municipal work. Not a ton of it. We do mostly applicant work, but we represent the Casino Redevelopment Authority in Atlantic City. We just did a whole redevelopment and right of their regulations, and we do redevelopment and municipal planning throughout the state as well.
The board will recognize and accept Mr. Cafone's qualifications as a professional.
She didn't mention that she's a court-appointed master, I don't think.
I did not.
Maybe she, we try not to mention that if we don't have to.
Gotta blow those.
Yes, the Court of Affordable Housing Special Master, and about 20, working for about 8 different judges in too many towns to count. So we're busy.
All right, Christine, you want to start your planning testimony?
I do. The subject application is a little interesting because we're asking for a D4 variance to sort of memorialize action that happened a couple years ago in conjunction with the subdivision. We are not asking for any additional floor area in conjunction with this application. As you heard from the prior witnesses, is the addition of 60 new spaces, which comes from the reconfiguration of 28 and the new construction of 32. So the reason we're seeking the D4 FAR variance for floor area ratio is to sort of go back and clean clean up that FAR that resulted in conjunction with the subdivision that happened a couple of years ago. So the case law on a FAR variance is such that you don't have to demonstrate particular suitability. What we have to demonstrate to you is that the site can handle the excess FAR. Well, certainly bringing the site closer into conformance with your ordinance standards with parking is going to help the site handle the FAR that exists on the building today. As the chairman and other board members have properly indicated, we're not eliminating the variance, but we are certainly coming closer into conformance, having about 580 or 587 spaces required. We're bringing the site to about 520. So certainly a better parking ratio over than what exists today. So I think we meet our burden of proof on the D variance. We're also asking for a C variance for the impervious coverage. Because the lot size has been reduced and we are adding impervious coverage, we're asking for an impervious coverage of 63.46%, where 60 is permitted in the zone. You heard Mr. Stiers testify earlier this evening that we will be maintaining the rate of runoff and flow. So we're certainly not going to be creating any additional adverse conditions relating from stormwater management. So I think the board can certainly look at that as a C2 variance with the purpose of there being sufficient space in appropriate locations, which is criteria D of the land use law, and also criteria M, which talks about an efficient use of the land. This is an existing developed office park, so certainly it's inefficient to sort of create additional parking in this location where you already have disturbance. And I think that there is a total lack of negative impacts with this. When we're asking for a D, C1, C2 variance, we have an obligation as the applicant to demonstrate the negative criteria, that there's no negative impact on the public good or no negative impact on the zone plan here in Bedminster. As far as the public good, I see no deleterious impacts if in fact the variance relief is granted. The site will only become more in conformance with respect to the parking standards, which given the lack of negative impacts relating to stormwater management, I think we certainly meet that balancing impact, having more parking on site. As far as the impact on the zone plan, while we are increasing the impervious coverage slightly, we are coming more conformance to the other sections of the ordinance. So I think given the wholesale balancing of this application and the fact that this will facilitate the tenanting and ultimate use and occupancy of this project and the existing site in a manner that's more consistent with the demands of the marketplace, I think the board can certainly move this application favorably, and the totality of the variance request for the D4 and the C variances, the burden of proof is satisfied. Nothing. Oh, did you want me to go through Mr. Banish's October 4th review letter? Or did you have a question?
I have a question.
Sure.
I understand that our parking requirement is 4 per thousand, so by increasing the number of parking spots, you're becoming more in compliance with that. But you wouldn't say that the increased densification on that site is not an adverse impact?
I wouldn't, because the floor space is there. It's not like we're introducing additional square footage to this building that isn't there today. I mean, the building is over 132,100 square feet, so we're really not intensifying the use of the
property. But there are less trees and less grass and less, things like that would otherwise be, we look favorably on.
Sure, I understand that. But as Mr. Stiers said, we're not increasing the rate of runoff or flow. So while we are increasing impervious coverage, there's really no negative impacts resulting from that, because there's no deleterious impacts with respect to stormwater management.
It's not like we're adding any mass, your argument is. It's not like we're adding any mass or any structure here.
Right.
It's just more parking, and as long as we can accommodate the runoff, there's no adverse impact.
And it's an existing disturbed site. So we're talking about a 132,100 square foot building, a parking field of 460 spaces. So this is not going to have a radical change on the landscape of this area. These improvements already exist in the area today. We're not introducing them into the area, they exist there. And the balancing, which is what planning is, we balance the positive and negative impacts. The last thing that we want in our commercial zones is vacant or hard to lease office space that becomes obsolete and antiquated. So we balance that and we say, you know what, we're going to put some more parking here because it makes sense to do it here where there's already existing disturbance rather than to go somewhere else and create new space. Let's try to make this a more thriving office building in the marketplace with, of It's not an addition of 60 spaces. 28 of them are being reconfigured. So you're talking about the creation of 32 new ones, the parking field.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great answer, by the way.
Thank you. So to comment on Mr. Banish's October 4th review letter, I think that comment 2.2 or 2.1 is really just the relief that's required. I concur with him in comment 2.2 that the parking will bring the project more closer into conformance with the ordinance. Oh, I should have probably touched on the fact that there are two pre-existing nonconformities as identified by Mr. Banish, the 400 feet for lot width and lot frontage, where 380.04 exists. Those are existing conditions. They're not going to be impacted our way, positively or negatively, by this application. I think testimony was provided as far as the ordinance compliance for lighting and landscaping. Mr. Stiers testified to that.
Yeah, I think the rest of it's really been covered.
Yes, the rest of it's been addressed by the engineer. So I have nothing further on direct. I'm available if anybody has any questions.
Paul, are you okay with the increase in coverage here with the drainage?
Yeah, they've made the stormwater work. This is a large, it's effectively a regional basin, and it works well.
Okay, all right. Anything else, Paul?
No.
No. Frank?
I think I'd have to concur with what Christine suggested, which is in the world of what's most important. There was a time here where we were lowering densities and intensities because we could command that from the marketplace. Now we want tenants in these buildings, and I think we have to deal with that in an appropriate way. So it certainly is being done in a workmanlike way that will look just like it fits into that environment.
In keeping with that, remember, this is one of your state development and redevelopment plan center areas, Pluckman Village, including this property, as Bedminster Village. Highlands Council should have put them in as Highland Centers, but didn't do it. Mistake, not yours. And this is where you've said, let's concentrate our growth, and you have done it, and it quite successfully. So, and that has helped you defend the environs, which we have in the R10 and R3 districts. So the ordinance says have more parking. The configuration is what it is. You saw a prior similar situation, and you've heard about this. You're all very familiar with the enhanced demand. So this is the center where these are the centers where you've been trying to get it to occur. So if the board, we should open to the public, Madam Chairman. There's nobody here, but
Yeah, open it to the
thank-
public, and seeing none, we'll continue.
the board.
Thank you.
Frank, did you have anything further you wanted to add?
Nothing,
Okay, sorry. You can add anything.
Frank.
Either Frank can add anything, but.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we've concluded our presentation. Just very briefly, I think it's a good application. I think we've offered sufficient testimony and sufficient proofs for you and your discretion to grant the application as presented.
Well, we recognize that there's change in office space for sure, so I would say go ahead, Tom, and
The Board of
propose the
Entertainment-
resolution.
It's a motion to approve the amended preliminary and final site plan and related C2 variances and D variance for floor ratio. The conditions are Paul and Frank's report, the standard conditions, and it could be effective this evening, provided they obtain all other governmental approvals.
We need a motion.
So moved. Second.
Second.
Mr. Tracco?
Aye.
Mr. West?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Dudley?
Aye.
Mr. Tracco?
Aye.
Ms. Tracco? Aye. Ms. Bailey?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Congratulations, thank you.
Get it rented.
Yeah, right.
Make them with you. Sell them, baby.
Good luck, Chris.
We just got to finish up here. Is there any other things from the Board of Adjustment that anyone like to talk about? Board of Adjustment, do I hear? And do we have anything more from Bedminster 2?
We have not had anything come in yet, no.
Nothing.
What about
Okay.
next meeting?
I'm sorry?
Next meeting?
Next meeting is in November. Do we have any,
We don't have anything pending for November
we
2nd?
have nothing.
The only thing we...
Yeah, we had last week off, come on.
First time since I have worked here that we have had
Nothing for the whole
nothing
month?
on the agenda.
Well, the only...
Nothing pending other than evidence of two.
Yeah, and we'll have the resolution.
Coming tomorrow.
We'll have the resolutions that will have to be adopted probably sometime in November.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Tom, what do you
I
think?
guess
about
so, you know. The statute says 45 days, we always beat it, but if you don't make it, it doesn't, it's
What are they
not
gonna
that
do?
much consequence. They can sue you to force you to do the resolution, so,
that? So maybe
So,
the second Thursday, maybe?
or, let's see, what's
Second-
today? Today's
the second and the 9th.
12th.
of November.
The 9th.
So,
The 9th, you guys want to do the 9th?
We might as well plan for the 9th.
Let's do it the other way around, so I can go and
Is it the second?
Well, that's up to Tom if he can finish the resolution.
probably, yeah. If we don't, we'll go to the next month. That's what I'm trying to say, is I'm not too burdened. I don't even know if the only reason you're having a meeting is the two resolutions. Let's see, they were, the preliminary requires a lot of conditions.
Right.
Subdivision. This one, I said in the motion that it's effective immediately, which deals with, as far as I'm concerned, it's enough.
It's
But
minimal.
if they need more, if you want to wait till December something, I could live with that.
What I might suggest is cancel the November 2nd one and keep November 9th on there,
Yes.
just in case something comes in
Well, that's what I was going to say, too.
that's doable in that time.
There you go.
All right,
There is no 16.
all right. So we'll,
Oh, that's, yeah, we don't have one then anyway.
so we'll have a very short meeting on the 9th.
Yippee. Yeah, you got it, bro.
All right, so we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Seconded.
Second. All in favor?